Hey everyone, let's dive into the fascinating topic of multiple personality disorder today. This condition involves a single person harboring several distinct personalities within them. One of the most well-known cases in history involves an American named William Milligan. His name might not ring a bell for many, but he's more famously known by another name. That name is Billy. Today, I'm going to share a bit about Billy and the various personalities he exhibited. Back in October 1977, in a town in Ohio, USA, 3 robberies took place over the course of 10 days. According to the victims, the way these 3 robberies unfolded was strikingly similar. In each case, someone approached them in a parking lot, took control of their vehicle, and forced them to drive to a bank. There, they were made to withdraw money and hand it over to the perpetrator, who then fled the scene. Since the crimes followed a nearly identical pattern and occurred in close proximity, the police suspected they were the work of a single individual. The skillful execution of the robberies led authorities to believe the culprit likely had a criminal history. To confirm their suspicions, the police showed photos of known offenders to the victims. The victims quickly pointed out the suspect, unanimously identifying him as Billy. At the time, Billy was 22 years old. 2 years earlier, he had been arrested for robbing a pharmacy, and just 6 months prior, he had been released on parole. Later, the police discovered fingerprints on one of the victims' cars, but these prints didn't match Billy's at all. Despite this, they were convinced he was the perpetrator. The police moved swiftly to arrest him, and the process went smoothly. Billy didn't resist. In fact, he seemed genuinely bewildered, asking, "Why are you arresting me?" When officers searched his home, they encountered something bizarre. The house looked like it was shared by multiple people. Some areas were spotless and meticulously organized, while others were in complete disarray. It gave the impression that several people lived there, but in reality, Billy was the only resident. During the interrogation that followed, Billy repeatedly insisted, "I've never robbed anyone or done anything like that. If I did, I'm truly sorry." The police, however, were convinced he was putting on an act. Let's pause to consider the context of the time. In 1977, multiple personality disorder wasn't widely accepted, even in the medical community. At police stations, if someone displayed signs of this condition, officers typically assumed the suspect was faking it. During questioning, Billy initially denied being Billy altogether and refused to acknowledge any involvement in the crimes. That same day, the police handcuffed him to another prisoner to transport them to a detention facility. But when they arrived, and the prisoners stepped out of the vehicle, the officers were stunned to find Billy's handcuffs unlocked. Billy sat there with an innocent expression, as if he had no clue what had just happened. When the police questioned the other prisoner about how the handcuffs came off, he explained that Billy had unlocked them himself. "This kid's something else. He just popped them open," the prisoner said. Yet Billy seemed completely unaware of his own actions. After being locked up in the detention center, Billy's behavior began to shift dramatically. Initially, when Billy was arrested, he seemed genuinely convinced of his innocence. But once he was in the detention center, his demeanor shifted dramatically. He became arrogant and even started banging his head against the wall. Fearing he might harm himself, the police put him in a straitjacket. To their astonishment, Billy managed to slip out of it, roll it up, and use it as a pillow to sleep on. The officers found his behavior so peculiar that they decided to bring in a psychologist to talk to him. The psychologist asked, "Could you tell me your ID number?" Billy replied, "I don't have an ID." The psychologist pressed, "Isn't your ID number F?" Billy responded, "That's Billy's ID, not mine." Intrigued, the psychologist asked, "Then who are you?" He answered, "I'm David." When asked where Billy was, he said, "Billy's asleep." "Asleep where?" the psychologist inquired. Pointing to himself, he said, "Asleep in here." The psychologist continued, "I'd like to speak with Billy." David replied, "You can't. Arthur won't allow it." He added, "Without Arthur's permission, no one can wake Billy." If you try, he might hurt himself. The psychologist noticed David nervously biting his fingertips and speaking in a very childlike manner. Curious, she asked, "How old are you?" David answered, "I'm 8, almost 9. The psychologist suggested, "Since I can't wake Billy without Arthur's approval, could I speak with Arthur instead?" David nodded, saying, "Sure, I'll go get Arthur for you." He then lowered his head, his eyes glazing over as he stared ahead, his lips moving as if muttering to himself. Moments later, he looked up, and he had transformed into Arthur. This new personality, Arthur, left the psychologist utterly convinced of Billy's multiple personality disorder. Arthur presented himself as an English gentleman, speaking with the refined tone of an upper-class British aristocrat, a manner of speech that seemed impossible to fake unless one had lived in such circles. Arthur was passionate about science and medicine, wore glasses due to nearsightedness, unlike the other personalities, and was the only one who needed them. When Arthur first emerged, he seemed disoriented, asking, "Where am I?" The psychologist had to explain his situation. Once he understood, Arthur stated, "If you want to wake Billy, you'll need the consent of all of us." After finishing, he lowered his head again, and when he looked up, he had switched to a new personality named Alan. Alan was a charming, talkative young man, and the only personality who was right-handed. All the others wrote with their left hand. He was also the only one who smoked. Later, it was discovered that Alan was exceptionally skilled at painting portraits. Here's one of the portraits Alan created. After Alan appeared, he switched to other personalities, each one reacting with surprise upon waking, asking, "Where am I? Why am I here?" The psychologist had to repeatedly explain the situation to each new personality. Most of these personalities were friendly, but seemed reserved and introverted. Through Alan, who was particularly articulate, the psychologist learned how Billy's personalities switched internally. Alan described a shared inner space, a dark room where all the personalities stood in a circle. In the center was a beam of light, like a spotlight on a stage. Whichever personality stepped into this light would take control of Billy's body. However, Arthur was the one who ultimately decided who stepped into the light. Everyone followed Arthur's lead. Each time a personality switch occurred, Billy's eyes would glaze over, and he'd stare ahead while muttering softly, as if the personalities were discussing among themselves. In the end, Arthur always made the final call on who would take the spotlight. The psychologist soon realized the case was too complex to handle alone, so she brought in other doctors and reputable psychologists to examine Billy. Most of these experts initially doubted the existence of multiple personality disorder. But after witnessing Billy's case firsthand, every one of them became convinced that he was indeed a true case of multiple personalities. Why does this happen? Because the switches between personalities are incredibly swift, and each personality has its own distinct and consistent traits. There's no overlap between them. Each one is a unique individual. After extensive observation, experts concluded that Billy had a total of 24 personalities. You might wonder why they didn't just ask Arthur directly, "How many of you are there?" The reason is that Arthur wasn't keen on sharing this information. He had locked away 13 personalities he deemed undesirable, and these were only uncovered later during therapy. Of the 24 personalities, 23 had their own names, consisting of both men and women. The youngest was just 3 years old, while the oldest was 26. These personalities' ages never changed. They remained fixed over time. The 3-year-old stayed 3 forever, and the 26-year-old remained 26. Each personality also had a distinct appearance, with different hairstyles, hair colors, eye colors, clothing styles, and even makeup preferences. These physical descriptions weren't self-reported, but were described by the other personalities. The youngest, a 3-year-old girl named Christine, had blonde hair and blue eyes. The portrait we mentioned earlier was painted by Alan, who saw her in this form. Christine had an older brother, also one of Billy's personalities, and she struggled with dyslexia. However, she shared that Arthur was teaching her to recognize letters and read, showing that the personalities could influence one another. The oldest personality, aged 26, was known as the teacher. This personality had no personal name and was a unique blend of traits from the other 23 personalities. The teacher possessed the memories of all the others, unlike the rest, who had no access to each other's experiences, as they were entirely separate individuals. The teacher's existence was key to unraveling Billy's mystery. He was highly intelligent, humorous, and harmless, dedicated to educating the other personalities, which is why they called him the teacher. He viewed the other 23 personalities as his children and believed he was the true Billy. In reality, though, he was just another personality, not the core. So who was Billy? Billy was the central personality, the one named Billy, who remained dormant, asleep. His memories were frozen at the moment he attempted suicide in high school. This core Billy was considered the primary personality because, before his mind fragmented severely, he was the dominant one. After his suicide attempt, new personalities emerged, and he was no longer in control, with others taking over instead. These later personalities didn't split from Billy directly, but from other personalities. They kept Billy asleep because they believed waking him would lead to another suicide attempt. They were all protecting him to keep him alive. After 3 months of working with Billy, the psychologist finally persuaded Arthur to wake him. This was the first time the core Billy had surfaced since his high school suicide attempt. Upon waking, he was overwhelmed with panic, immediately asking, "Am I dead or alive? Where am I?" The psychologist had to reassure him repeatedly, saying, "You're at the police station. I'm here to help and treat you." Gradually, he calmed down. Through conversations with Billy, the psychologist discovered that he was the only personality unaware of the other 23, while they all knew of his existence. One particularly significant personality emerged when Billy met with his lawyer, a 23-year-old man named Ragan. Ragan spoke English, Serbo-Croatian, and Ukrainian, with a thick Yugoslavian accent when speaking English. He was deeply knowledgeable about weapons and hand-to-hand combat. Most remarkably, he could control his adrenaline levels, granting him extraordinary strength, capable of breaking a punching bag with his bare hands, as if professionally trained. Dragon was Billy's crisis management personality, surfacing during danger or when destruction was needed. However, he had a unique flaw. When Dragon took control, Billy's vision became colorblind, seeing the world in only black and white. While typical color blindness allows some perception of colors, Dragon's world was entirely devoid of them, limited to shades of gray. Let's revisit the teacher personality. As I mentioned, only the teacher holds the memories of all the other personalities. Through him, experts later uncovered why Billy became the way he is today. Billy was born on Valentine's Day in 1955. His father was a stand-up comedian, a somewhat outdated artist, and his mother was a nightclub singer. When Billy was born, his father was unemployed, often drunk, and heavily into gambling, which plunged the family into deep debt. Unable to cope with the pressure, his father took his own life when Billy was just 3 years old. Afterward, Billy's mother remarried twice, and the combination of family trauma, a chaotic home environment, and mistreatment from his stepfather worsened Billy's mental state, leading to increasingly severe personality splits. The youngest personality, only 3 years old, emerged at this early age, marking the onset of Billy's dissociative identity disorder. Later, it became clear that most of these personality splits occurred during critical moments in his life. For instance, at age 4, after being scolded by his mother for a mistake, Billy experienced intense emotional distress. This triggered the creation of a personality named Sean, a 4-year-old deaf boy who couldn't hear anything. When Sean took over, no matter how much his mother scolded him, Billy wouldn't hear it. Sean essentially served as a protective shield for him. Whenever someone criticized Billy, and he didn't want to hear it, Sean would emerge. Another example involves his abusive stepfather, who frequently beat and restrained him. This led to the creation of Tommy, the personality who skillfully unlocked the police handcuffs when Billy was taken to the detention center. Tommy was an escape artist, having honed various techniques to free himself during his struggles with his stepfather. Whenever Billy was restrained or in danger, Tommy would take over. In other words, many of Billy's personalities were born out of moments of hardship. However, some personalities seemed entirely unrelated to his experiences, and to this day, no one knows how they came to be. By the time Billy was 17, he was unaware of how many personalities he had. So, how did he discover his condition? He began noticing significant memory gaps, waking up in unfamiliar places with no idea how he got there. These disorienting, almost time travel-like experiences, where time and place shifted uncontrollably, terrified him. Unable to bear this pressure, Billy decided to end his life by jumping off a building. At the critical moment, however, a new personality, the Yugoslavian Dragon, emerged, suppressing his urge and saving him from jumping. From that point on, the core Billy personality fell into a deep sleep, his memories frozen at that moment. His next memory was waking up in the police station. Before this deep sleep, Billy's core personality had already developed around 7 or 8 personalities. These were non-destructive, merely taking control of his body and causing memory lapses. The remaining dozen or so personalities evolved from Dragon over time. Among them was a unique personality, a 19-year-old woman named Adalana. She was lively, knew how to cook, handle household chores, and even write poetry. However, Arthur strongly disapproved of Adalana, so she was kept suppressed and only discovered later during therapy. Like some others, no one knows how Adalana came to exist. When Billy was awakened at the police station, he had no idea about his other personalities. To help him understand, the police recorded the behaviors of his various personalities on video and showed them to him. The footage shocked him profoundly, causing the core Billy personality to fall back into a deep sleep. But this wasn't a problem, as the core Billy hadn't been in control for a long time. Instead, stronger personalities like Ragan or Arthur were running the show. So, which personality was responsible for Billy's crimes? The first time he robbed a pharmacy, it was Kevin, a personality who meticulously planned and executed the crime. When Kevin was arrested and sent to prison, Billy's personality switched to Ragan, as prison represented a crisis, and Ragan always emerged in dangerous situations. Thus, Ragan was the dominant personality during his time in jail. After his release, Billy's personality shifted to Adalana. This gentle, talkative woman quickly found a job at a flower shop. However, during her work, she would unexpectedly switch to male personalities, leaving Billy confused about why he was there. As a result, the shop owner promptly fired him. This pattern repeated with other jobs. Sudden personality switches left Billy unaware of why he was working somewhere, leading to repeated dismissals. Unable to hold a steady job, Billy struggled financially, and as his situation grew more desperate, Ragan re-emerged. Determined to solve the money problem, Ragan, who wasn't much of a planner, went to a parking lot and spotted a woman parking her car. Suddenly, his personality switched to Adalana, who approached the woman and struck up a conversation. While chatting with the woman, Billy suddenly switched to Kevin. This personality, Kevin, used a gun to force the victim into her car, compelling her to drive to a bank and withdraw money. After successfully stealing the cash, he headed home, but halfway there, he switched to Ragan. Since Ragan's memories were frozen from the moment he left the house, he was baffled to find himself holding a stack of money. Delighted, he returned home with it. Once home, Billy's personality shifted to Tommy, who noticed the pile of cash on the table and promptly spent it all. After the money was gone, he switched back to Ragan, who was confused, saying, "I just brought this money home. How is it already gone?" He searched everywhere, but couldn't find it. So, Ragan decided to go out again, and the cycle repeated. Each time, Ragan left the house and somehow returned with money, only for it to disappear shortly after. This pattern happened 3 times. Throughout this process, Ragan was the one constantly left puzzled. Tommy was the one enjoying the spending spree. Kevin was the one committing the crimes. And Adalana was the one initiating friendly conversations with the victims. Because of this, Billy's crimes always targeted women. The female victims described him as extremely friendly at first, showing no signs of being a criminal. He'd be chatting warmly one moment, then suddenly transform into a perpetrator. The crimes were executed with remarkable precision. After a thorough investigation, both the judge and prosecutor became convinced that Billy genuinely had multiple personality disorder. In 1978, the court declared Billy not guilty by reason of insanity, but he was required to undergo treatment. Until his condition was resolved, he could not return to society. When later asked why he believed Billy's condition was real and not an act, the prosecutor explained that the main reason was Billy's distinct accents. Each personality had a unique, consistent accent that was flawless, especially the aristocratic British accent of Arthur, which seemed impossible to fake. To this day, no one knows how Billy developed such an accent. After the trial, Billy was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. The goal wasn't to eliminate his personalities, but to integrate them into a single, unified identity. The team chose the teacher personality for this role, as it was the only one with access to the memories of all 23 other personalities. The core Billy personality, however, was not a viable option. His memories were stuck at the moment of his high school suicide attempt, and he was prone to slipping back into a dormant state. Even if reintegrated into society, he lacked the skills to sustain a job or function normally, making him unsuitable as the central personality. Thus, the decision was made to suppress Billy and all other personalities, allowing only the teacher to remain dominant. After 10 years of treatment, by the time Billy was 36, all his personalities had been integrated into one. The court declared him not guilty and released him, allowing him to rejoin society. At this point, he was essentially the teacher. In other words, Billy had become a different person entirely. In a 2009 interview when he was 54, he was asked if his other personalities were truly gone. He replied, "They're all still there. I've just learned to control them and keep them from stepping into the spotlight." He described the process as incredibly painful, explaining that early on, he had to restrain himself during sleep to prevent personality switches. "If my personality changes while I'm asleep, I'm helpless," he said. "So, at night, I just focus on controlling Tommy, the escape expert." Billy passed away in 2014 at the age of 59. To give you a clearer picture, let's recap his 24 personalities. Billy, the core personality, with memories frozen at his high school suicide attempt. Arthur, an English gentleman with an upper-class accent, passionate about science and medicine, and the manager of all personalities. Ragan, a Yugoslavian man skilled in weapons and combat, fluent in Serbo-Croatian and Ukrainian, colorblind, seeing only in black and white. Alan, a charismatic talker, the only right-handed personality and the only smoker, skilled at painting portraits. Tommy, an escape artist, proficient in saxophone, landscape painting, and electronics. Danny, a 14-year-old boy terrified of men. David, an 8-year-old beloved by all personalities, serving as their intermediary for communication. Christine, a 3-year-old girl, highly intelligent but dyslexic. Christopher, Christine's brother, skilled at playing the harmonica. Adalana, a 19-year-old woman who cooks, does housework, and writes poetry. Phil, a New Yorker with a Brooklyn accent. Kevin, a meticulous criminal planner. Walter, a 22-year-old Australian with excellent directional sense and hunting skills. April, a 19-year-old Boston-accented woman skilled in sewing. Samuel, an 18-year-old devout Jewish man, the only religious personality. Mark, a workaholic who thrives on repetitive, challenging tasks. Bobby, a skilled imitator, the only personality who refused therapy. Lee, a comedian. Jason, a personality with amnesia, crucial early on for suppressing painful memories, later suppressed by Arthur. Steve, an explorer with big dreams but little interest in learning. Sean, a 4-year-old deaf boy who emerges when Billy doesn't want to hear something. Martin, a boastful New Yorker dreaming of wealth. Timothy, a flower shop worker, not very knowledgeable, suppressed by Arthur. The teacher, a fusion of all other personalities' traits, holding their collective memories. In medical terms, those living within Billy's body are called personalities, fragments of a whole. However, during treatment, both Arthur and Ragan challenged this, insisting they were real individuals, not mere fragments, and should be recognized as such. It's hard to argue with them. Each had their own appearance, personality, and talents, capable of communicating with each other and the outside world independently. If they had their own physical bodies, who could deny they were distinct individuals? It's astonishing to think that Billy, raised in the US, developed British and Yugoslavian accents, fluency in Arabic, Serbo-Croatian, and Ukrainian, and remarkable skills in painting and music. Even stranger, when different personalities took control, Billy's body physically adapted. When Ragan emerged, his muscle strength and adrenaline levels surged, making him powerful and agile. But when 8-year-old David took over, Billy couldn't even push a cart. When Tommy, the escape artist, was in control, Billy's body became remarkably flexible, almost as if his bones could bend. Yet, when another personality took over, this ability vanished. It's as if the human body is like clothing, taking on different qualities depending on who wears it. Could the mind or willpower of a person shape their physical state in such a way? Thank you for following along. If you enjoyed this, feel free to subscribe for more videos or check out other content on this channel.